Everyone, Mrs. Novello here in the Expressive Arts Room, and today I'm going to walk through how to create a word photography design using Photoshop. So by now you all should have your images that you took in a folder saved in Google Drive. I had mine, and now you're going to need to download them onto your desktop because we'll be working with the Macs. So once you download it to your desktop, your folder will be available for you. What you're going to do is select your first image of your word. So I'm going to choose this image. I'm going to drag it to Photoshop, and then it opens up a window with my letter inside of it. Alright, so the very first thing we're going to do is crop our image. So on the left hand side you'll see a whole bunch of tools in Photoshop. I'm going to select the crop tool. It defaults to unconstrained, so I'm going to toggle down to a 1x1 square. That's Catzilla in the background. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit return, and I need to edit my image for a couple of things. I want to make sure that the focal point contrasts with the background. So I'm going to select image, select adjustments, and select brightness and contrast. If this window opens up over your image, simply grab it and slide it over so that you can see your work in progress. The very first thing I want to do is add some contrast. This might be cranking it up for some people. This might be just tweaking it a little bit to create more contrast in the background so that your subject pops. Then you'll want to tweak the brightness, and this will be a personal preference of how they want their image to look. Once you're finished with that, click OK. Some of you may want to create your project in black and white, and others in color, so I'm going to demonstrate how to do both. First, in order to get it to black and white, you'll go to Image, tap Adjustments, and click to black and white. Again, if this window opens up of your letter, just simply slide it over. Now it says default, and it presets these colors to how the default is set up, but you will need to manually adjust these settings, and even though it is black and white, sliding these colors around does affect the overall appearance. So you will need to do this for every single letter to get it to look in the black and white state that you want it. And once you do that, you'll click OK. I'm going to do mine in color, so I'm going to cancel out of this. I've already created contrast, which is required for both black and white and color, but now for my color image, I'm going to go back to Image, to Adjustments. I'm going to go to Color Balance. And what this will do, it'll infuse a little bit more of the primary and secondary colors if I want them to. So right now this is the default. I feel like this picture is very warm with the red and the yellows, so I may play around with some cooler color elements to create more of a contrast. And I like how that looks. I'm going to click OK. Alright, so I have my S, it contrasts, it looks good within the background. I'm ready to create my canvas. So we started at 1-to-1 square. We're going to go back to unconstrained. This is going to allow us to stretch out this canvas so that we can add other letters into it. You do that by grabbing the handle, pulling, and stretching it to the length that you want it to be. Some of you are going to have fewer letters than others. You can always go back and stretch this out more if you need to. When you release, it gives you a white screen. Alright, later on it's going to ask us if we want to crop it, and we're going to say yes. But for right now, you're going to go ahead and minimize Photoshop, go back to your letter folder, and select the next letter for your word. For me, it's going to be O. So I'm going to drag this back into Photoshop. The steps that we're doing now are very repetitive. Up, and there is the crop message, so we do want to crop it. Alright, and my next letter should show up. There it is. Alright. So back to the steps that we just walked through. We want to go to the crop tool. We want to turn this to a 1-to-1 square. When we do that, we'll hit return. We'll need to add contrast, so we'll go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. The first thing I want to do is make sure I have good contrast. If you have pictures that are a little shadowy, you may not want to add so much contrast because that's going to create a darker image. Or if you do, then you'll want to infuse some brightness to lighten it up. Right? So once you're done with that, you go to Image. This is going to be different for students that are doing a black and white project or a color project. You would go to Adjustments. Again, if you're doing it in black and white, you would toggle down to black and white. But I'm going to do color, so I'm going to click Color Balance. I feel like there is a lot of warmth in the background, but I like how there's a little bit of blue on my tire. So I'm going to infuse a little bit more blue. Oh, and here's another issue. I have some unwanted details in my picture. Do you see that my shoes are in here? So if you need to crop your image further, do so. But keep in mind that you want your letter to always remain centered within your image. Right? So if you have to crop it down, make sure that you have an equal border on the right and left side and the top and bottom. Alright, so I've cropped out my feet, I've changed the contrast, I've added some color. Now I'm going to hit Return. Now remember, we go to Unconstrained now, and now we're going to drop this image in to our canvas. So I'm going to click on the Move tool, which is the very top tool on the left. I'm going to put my cursor on the tire, or the O. I'm going to click it, and I'm going to drag it over to this first file. It's going to open it up, and I'm simply going to release, and it'll drop in my O. But because I shrunk it down in the crop tool, I need to increase the size. So in order to do that, I'm going to click Command T, and it will allow me to expand my image to the size I need it to be. Now when I do this, I want to make sure that it's the same square size as my first letter. I want that to match. I want it to be consistent. So just eyeball that. And then you need to be aware of the space in between your two images. You can move your image over if you want more of a gap in between each letters, but I recommend you have a little bit of space. I don't think that fusing them together is a good idea because I think that sometimes images will blur together and create visual confusion. So create a space in between, but just keep in mind to have that same consistent space for the rest of your letter. Alright, so once you're done with that, you're going to minimize and you're going to choose your next letter. So I'm going to walk this through one more time. Grab your letter from your folder, and again, it's not going to work from your Google Drive. So if you have your pictures still in Google Drive and you haven't downloaded them to your desktop, it's not going to work. You need to download your folder to the desktop. You're going to drag it down to Photoshop. And it's going to ask you to apply the transformation because that was Command T, so we want to apply it. That didn't work. We'll go back later. And then you're going to go through the whole process of cropping this 1-to-1 square, editing it, adding the contrast and color, and then dropping it in. So here, it worked. All right, so that is how you create your word photography using Adobe Photoshop.